Hey, welcome everyone to another one of our special in-depth what-if shows. Today, we're diving into the fascinating realm of global affairs. Whoa. Stay with us. It's going to be exciting. This is What If, after all. I'm not here to teach a world affairs class. Let's have some fun. And we will. Our little blue marble is currently experiencing what is called a robust geopolitical shuffle, which is just a fancy way of saying everyone is politely but firmly disagreeing on absolutely everything, from trade to oil to invasion to the proper amount of mustard on a salami sandwich. And there's no limit, no. And speaking of disagreements, there seems to be a new global pastime these days. Sending mildly confusing tweets about buying, invading, and claiming ownership of Greenland? Greenland? Apparently, one major power is convinced it can turn this icy expanse into its own theme park. But the real chaos is trying to budget for the inevitable polar bear attack-related expenses. Don't worry, though. Our world leaders are navigating this new era with all the grace and finesse of a toddler trying to fold a fitted sheet. The future is bound to be entertaining. So grab your popcorn and your protest sign or your survival backpack and settle in. First up, a lot of our conflict attention these days is focused on Ukraine and Venezuela and Greenland, and Canada, and Panama, and Colombia, and Cuba, and Iran, and Nicaragua, and Nigeria, and Minnesota, and, well, I think we may have taken our eyes off a possible invasion target in East Asia. Let's not forget about China's desire for Taiwan.
The battle lines are drawn. China is about to follow through on its long-standing threat to take over its neighbor, the island nation of Taiwan. What happens now? What could lead these two nations to the brink of war? How would the escalation begin? And if other world powers got involved, would we all be doomed? This is What If, and here's what would happen if China invaded Taiwan.
Okay, quick brain fact. Did you know that curiosity is one of the only emotions that actually rewires your brain in real time? The moment you lean in to understand something, like you are right now, your neurons start building new pathways. When you watch curiosity-fueled content like this, your brain treats it like active learning, decoding and making sense of new ideas just like it does when you solve a puzzle. So, watching our shows is literally good for your brain. Well, that's why we launched the Popular Science Fast channel, where you can stream all our shows 24/7. Tune in any time of day and you'll find mind-bending science from us and from some of the world's leading creators, including NASA's spaceflight, Hacksmith, and Complexly. Plus, live rocket launches, documentaries, and deep dive specials. It's basically a non-stop feed of curiosity, always on, always learning. We're currently available on 10 different platforms, including Vizio, Roku, and Plex, but we're just getting started. We're reaching tens of millions of homes and streaming devices all over the globe, and that audience keeps growing every month. And the channel just keeps evolving. We're adding brand new series and specials monthly, from breakthroughs in tech to space exploration coverage you can watch live. It's a front row seat to the new space race, alongside a 150-year-old legacy of science storytelling, now being brought to streaming for the first time. So, if you ever finish one of these streams and still want more, well, you don't have to wait. You can jump straight into Popular Science and keep that curiosity going. It's there 24/7, ready whenever your brain wants its next aha moment.
Taiwan is an island located 160 kilometers from the southeastern coast of China. It's one of many islands in Asia's so-called First Island Chain, which includes Japan, parts of the Philippines, and Indonesia. There's conflict about Taiwan's sovereignty. China claims the territory belongs to them, but Taiwanese officials state they haven't been a part of China since at least 1949, when the People's Republic of China was formed. The outcome of this conflict doesn't just concern China and Taiwan. Many other nations are mixed up in this dangerous affair. Taiwan is a significant economic power as one of the world's biggest producers of computer chips and other electronics. And it's a vital part of United States foreign policy too. President Biden made this clear by saying that if China were to attack the island, then US troops would be involved in the defense effort. So, if China invades Taiwan, would it be the kickoff to World War III? Well before the first strike, you'd see signs of an already escalating conflict. China would bolster its military might by increasing its production of ballistic and cruise missiles. These would beef up their ability to bombard their targets from long range. But there would be more signs than just the obvious military preparations. China would take steps to boost its economy, making it less reliant on trade partners. It would be their way of preparing for increased sanctions in response to acts of war. The Chinese state would attempt to psychologically prepare its population for a war. They'd begin setting expectations for the conflict ahead. Prioritizing the transport of military personnel could bring serious disruptions to passenger air travel in the country. China would start accumulating emergency supplies and medicines and holding public blood drives. There could even be media discussions of the costs of war, with combat deaths possibly numbering in the tens of thousands. As the clock ticks down to the first strike, you'd see China order a national mobilization of its military. This would be the first time the country has done that since 1979, when they were fighting a major war against their southern neighbor, Vietnam. As the second biggest military spender in the world, behind only the US, you can imagine how massive this mobilization would be. There would be military exercises, hundreds of thousands of civilians enlisted, and ships deployed. Major infrastructure like airports, food storage, and energy facilities would also be taken under military control. Field hospitals would begin popping up all along the regions directly opposite Taiwan. Then, without much warning, the first missiles would come screaming through Taiwanese airspace. And with that, it would be time for Taiwan to defend itself. In many ways, it would be a battle of David versus Goliath. China's military spending is 10 times greater than Taiwan's, and the numbers would show it. China has nearly 1 million soldiers in their ground force, while Taiwan falls a few short of 100,000. To give you some idea of some of the differences in weaponry, Taiwan has 650 tanks, 4 submarines, and 0 nuclear bombs. China, on the other hand, has 5,400 tanks, 59 submarines, and over 400 operational nuclear warheads. Not to mention a massive naval fleet, advanced missile technology, and the potential to unleash dangerous cyber attacks. China would be a formidable enemy, so you'd see Taiwan doing what it could to slow down the attack and make it as costly for China as possible. This is called a porcupine strategy. The first step would be for Taiwan to do everything in its power to prevent Chinese naval forces across the Taiwan Strait from landing on their shores with soldiers, weapons, and supplies. With good surveillance of China's coast, Taiwan would have enough time to begin defensive maneuvers. They'd make fast, stealthy attacks on China's ships. They'd scatter sea mines across the strait to make crossing it more difficult. But the porcupine strategy couldn't hold off China's military might forever. Once the Chinese made land, Taiwan would engage in something more like guerrilla warfare. Nearby buildings would be turned into military barracks, housing soldiers and mobile anti-armor or air defense weaponry. 2 major countries you'd likely see stepping in to defend Taiwan would be the US and Japan. the US would pledge to continue selling defense systems while providing intelligence support. This would be crucial to Taiwan's chances of survival, but these countries would be exposing themselves to attacks of retaliation. And pretty soon, we could be on the brink of another world war. China could bombard foreign infrastructure, both with direct strikes and with cyber attacks. Thousands of United States and Japanese forces could be killed in action. From there, the conflict could continue to spread across the world. If the US directly engages with China, you might see Russia, one of China's closest allies, step into the fight. But Russia's military power is currently drained by the war it started in Ukraine, so there's a chance that Vladimir Putin wouldn't be able to flex his muscles and stoke the flames of war even more. This all sounds scary, but the most devastating toll of the war would be experienced by the people of Taiwan and China. Tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides could die in combat, and many more would become prisoners of war. War would severely impact the lives of civilians, too. Missile strikes would destroy homes, and many lives would be lost. Crippled economies, permanent blackouts, and famine would make things worse. If China were to actually invade Taiwan, there would be an avalanche of consequences that would impact people all over the world.
I hate that phrase, World War III. And it's popping up these days more than I care to hear it. Coming up later in the show, we'll check in to see what would happen if the US started World War III. And we'll take a trip to the cosmos to find out what it might be like if World War III was fought in space. Yeah, I'm contributing to the issue here. Okay, now let's get back to changing borders, but this time in a different part of the world. This time, no invasion, just amalgamation. Now, could you imagine a day when the 19 sovereign countries of Latin America and Puerto Rico band together as a cultural entity and form their own Spanish, Portuguese, French country? No, that's not to say that they're all the same. Common languages and ancestries don't necessarily make people have the same outlook on the world. Just look at the US from state to state. But what would it mean for this region to band together and form a landmass bigger than the US and Canada combined, with a common currency and free trade? And who would lead it?
What if I told you that Latin America could have hosted one of the world's greatest superpowers, capable of changing the course of history in ways that only players like the US, China, or Russia can today? And to do that, you'd only need to do one thing: unite all of its countries into a single state. How would this supernation turn into an economic powerhouse? Would it be a democracy or a dictatorship? And why wouldn't other governments dare mess with it? This is What If, and here's what would happen if Latin America was a single country. Latin America is spread over both North and South America, with 19 sovereign states and 1 independent territory, most of them considered developing nations. There is some debate about what exactly is Latin America. Well, for this scenario, we'll go with countries in the Americas where Spanish and Portuguese are predominantly spoken. Many people have had ambitions of combining them to form a larger nation, the most famous of them being Simón Bolívar, known in South America as the Liberator. This Venezuelan led the fight for independence from Spain across the region, and he believed uniting Latin America would be vital for its economic and political success in the world. So, what if Bolívar did manage to build one united nation? How could this superstate turn into the world's most feared dictatorship? The first step to accomplish this would be to convince each nation's elites to team up. With enough concessions, deals, and compromises, the wealthiest classes of Central and South America would have been swayed to join their states. The liberator would have then been appointed as the first president or prime minister of this union, and this superstate would be one of the largest nations on the planet, stretching from the border with Texas in the north to Tierra del Fuego in the south. Altogether, it would include Spanish and Portuguese South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico. That's a total of more than 20 million square kilometers, larger than the United States and Canada combined. And what a region it would be! The Amazon rainforest in Brazil, coastal waters and islands in Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, the Andes mountain range that goes from Chile all the way up to Colombia, glaciers in Argentina, tropical grasslands in Venezuela, deserts in Chile. These would be just a tiny fraction of the multitude of landforms in the supernation, many of them rich with natural resources and arable land. The potential for tourism, year-round agriculture, and manufacturing would make the rest of the world jealous. 8% of humanity, as well as 8% of its GDP, would reside within its borders. That's around 660 million inhabitants in one of the most diverse societies in the world. A nation with an astonishing abundance of different peoples, traditions, and cultures. Everyone in this new united supernation would speak either Spanish or Portuguese. All public documents would be printed in both languages, and schools would teach students to have at least a basic knowledge of the two. With this biodiversity of land and the sheer size of its workforce, this Latin America could become an economic superpower, just like the United States and China. It would export everyday staples like tobacco, beef, corn, wheat, fruits, beans, vegetables, sugar. Oh, this list is long. Most countries would be doing business with this food production giant. Brazil alone already leads the world in coffee production, harvests a quarter of the global citrus, has over 1/10 of all cattle supply, and produces 12% of the sugarcane. It's already made it to the list of the top 20 dominant economies on the planet thanks to its massive iron and aluminum ore reserves. As part of a bigger country where it could share even more resources with other territories, Brazil's economic might would only be greater. Imagine what it could do with Venezuela, which has the planet's largest oil reserves in its possession. Naturally, Latin America would have its own common currency. Just like in the European Union, it would make the region more attractive for international business. So, it seems like the Latin American supernation, if successfully formed, held together, and managed, would fulfill Bolivar's dream of an astonishing democratic superpower, right? Well, things are never quite that simple. Latin America's abundance of natural resources comes at the price of widespread political and social unrest. You see, the power would reside almost solely with the wealthiest elite, and as time went on, severe inequality would get worse. An impoverished majority would be socially, politically, and financially marginalized by a small group of oligarchs. Class warfare would become inevitable, and with it, the arrival of a prevalent figure in Latin American history. The caudillo, also known as a strongman, this is a breed of military and political leader with a big personality and a gift for creating populist discourse. Fidel Castro in Cuba and Augusto Pinochet in Chile fit the ticket. Extreme social division and discontent would set the stage for the rise of one of these strong men. They would speak for a silent majority who, in return, would support their rise to power. But once the caudillo took the reins, they wouldn't want to let go, and they could turn democracy into a dictatorship. But how would this strongman hold on to one of the planet's superpowers? After all, Latin American countries currently don't have the most advanced or well-funded militaries. In 2016, their combined defense budget of $67 billion was barely a drop in the bucket compared to the $801 billion of the United States. But on the other hand, the region does have a lot of soldiers, almost 2 million troops. So it looks like this superstate dictatorship wouldn't have the best equipped military, but it would be big enough to control and suppress its population and neutralize an uprising. But when it comes to dealing with foreign enemies, Latin America would require more drastic measures. It could side with Russia, a military powerhouse, and that would mean that Latin America would now have humanity's most destructive weapon: nukes. This would change geopolitics worldwide. The United States would either have to keep the peace or face having an enemy at its gates. It would stay away from funding military coups to remove anyone from power. It would just be too risky to do that to a Latin America armed with nukes. The influence of the West around the world would be severely reduced. But despite this, the United States would still make out all right. With its vast mineral and energy resources, food exports, and tourism opportunities, most American companies would turn a blind eye to the human rights abuses of the Latin American regime. So, one of the planet's mightiest superpowers would also be one of its most solidified and accepted dictatorships. You might want to reconsider where to take your tropical vacation in this new reality.
The time for talk is over. Now, the biggest countries on Earth are fighting for global supremacy. What would happen if the United States started World War III? Who would the US attack first? Could we use robot soldiers? Or would nuclear power win the day? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the United States started World War III. Imagine that for decades, the tension between the United States, Russia, and China has been rising. Whether it's through spies or tariffs, these nations constantly battle to one-up each other and control the resources on our planet. While wars of the past started over border disputes and assassinations, World War III could start in a virtual space. And if another cyber attack from China triggers the United States to respond, the conflict could grow into the most devastating war ever known. But if a war started tomorrow, would technology dominate over humans? World War II claimed about 75 million lives from 1939 to 1945. It left Japan and Europe in shambles and scarred a generation, but if the United States starts World War III, the death toll could be much higher and happen faster. And with the trade war between the United States and China escalating, the Western superpower could attack one of its biggest rivals. So, what weapons would it use to strike first? Drone technology has changed the face of modern warfare during the past few years, and now you may not even see it coming. The military could outfit drones with adaptive camouflage, small electronic panels that can display different patterns. These lightweight aircraft could slip right by you and you wouldn't know until it's too late. But what if these drones attacked you? Weapons manufacturers are developing a compact laser capable of shooting down missiles, aircraft, and drones. While your naked eye could miss these high-flying threats, the laser's powerful beam could track and tear through these drones. And on the ground, soldiers could have the same kind of precision weapons. Self-steering bullets could change how troops eliminate moving targets when fighting face-to-face. While the US government hasn't disclosed the details of how this technology works, these bullets have frightening accuracy, even in windy conditions. But as 2020 taught us, populations can be decimated without a bullet ever being fired. The Centers for Disease Control listed 30 microorganisms and toxins that terrorists could weaponize against a population. With the right delivery systems, these warring nations could use pathogens like the hantavirus or anthrax against each other. While bioweapons are nothing new, most agents lose 50% of their effectiveness in the air due to heat and humidity. But if nations want to cause mass destruction, they would unleash the worst weapon they have available. Although China has over 100 missile silos, the government has said they wouldn't strike first. But if this war became desperate enough, that could change. The United States owns over 5,600 nuclear missiles, and its political rival, Russia, has over 6,000 warheads ready to strike. But the idea of mutually assured destruction has prevented all sides from using this apocalyptic threat. But if cyber attacks took down air defenses and missile controls, all bets might be off. One warhead exploded over New York could instantly take out 300,000 people. Moscow and its surrounding areas could suffer almost 200,000 deaths in the blink of an eye. And that's only if 2 warheads were launched, one over each city. City after city across the globe could be wiped out in this war to end all wars. World War III could end all life on Earth if these nations didn't work out their differences. Are you prepared? What's your plan if World War III breaks out? I mean, barring a nuclear blast, you have a chance of survival. And I guess if you live in a remote enough part of the country or the world, you might be spared from the nuclear fallout. But do you have a plan for survival in a post-apocalyptic world? Well, I've got some flashlights and batteries and a selection of pocket knives and a good sleeping bag, but apart from that, I don't like my chances. I'd like to go back in time before Oppenheimer developed the atomic bomb. It would be great to get rid of these weapons altogether. Now, instead of dismantling them, one of the more radical ideas is to send them into space. Yeah, send 12,000 nukes into space and have them explode. What on earth or in space would happen then? A nuclear bomb is the most dangerous weapon we have on Earth, and thousands of them are spread across the world. Just one of these bombs has the power to wipe out an entire city, so what would happen if all of them launched at once? And instead of their targets being here on Earth, they were headed for space. Why would this be a good thing? How dangerous would these nukes be? And how far away would they need to travel to keep us safe? This is What If, and here's what would happen if all nukes exploded in space. Okay, before we send all these bombs out into orbit, let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with. First of all, we're not talking about 1 or 2 or even 100 nukes. Latest estimates put the total number of weapons of mass destruction scattered around the globe at approximately 12,705. And it should come as no surprise that they aren't evenly distributed among world powers. Of course, the US and Russia are in the lead by no small number. Between these two historic rivals, they have over 11,000 nuclear warheads. The remaining nuke-possessing countries like China, France, Pakistan, and India have no more than a measly couple hundred. But even some of these smaller nuclear devices could annihilate whole cities, wipe out thousands, if not millions of people, and bring our entire planet to the brink of destruction. So it's finally time to band together and finally get these bombs off of Earth. If we can. We live in an age where sending rockets into space feels like it happens almost every day. But shepherding thousands of nukes off of Earth is a bit more of a dangerous payload than SpaceX is used to handling. This effort would require a plan of action unlike anything before. Let's start with security. Sure, a scenario aiming to remove nuclear weapons and promote world peace is nice to imagine, but let's be real. Handing over nuclear weapons for disposal would be no simple task. Besides, who would be the trustworthy candidates to carry out the job? Nuclear weapons programs have extremely strict security protocols. No one individual has the ability to arm or launch weapons alone. And with peace on the horizon, now would be no time to change that. Clearly, a trusted international organization with a commitment to transparency would need to be created just for this project. It would be staffed by world governments, scientists, and the brightest minds Earth has to offer. Security would need to be as tight as ever, though, because there could be criminal organizations interested in taking advantage of this situation to gain a unique amount of power in a future without nukes, or at least without thousands of them. But let's skip ahead to the more out-of-this-world aspects of this scenario. Launching thousands of nukes would require new rockets to be built specifically for handling radioactive cargo. In the case of a leak or damage, they would need to be guaranteed without a doubt that they would exit our atmosphere safely. These rockets would need all the same durability and heat-resistant technology as space shuttles. Plus, they'd need to be more powerful and be able to carry more cargo than ever before. Nukes can weigh thousands of kilograms, and our current rockets aren't carrying those kinds of cargo loads, so we'd need to compensate for that. Each weapon would need to be individually housed in a shock-resistant containment vessel. And these would need to be able to withstand various disaster scenarios, in case the launch fails. One of the most dangerous aspects of this whole mission would be that these warheads would need to be detonation-ready before they leave the ground. If just one nuke or rocket malfunctions, it's game over for Earth. To be extra safe, the neutral organization overseeing this launch would need to build a brand new launch site specifically for this mission. And it would make sense that this site would be far, far away from highly populated regions of the world, to avoid worst-case scenarios. So, once we start launching these nukes, where would they go? Well, keep in mind that the International Space Station is orbiting Earth at over 400 kilometers above sea level, so we'd need to make sure that the rockets would speed well beyond this point. The last thing we'd want to do is to send any astronauts stationed there to the most explosive death possible. Now, if we did detonate the nukes too close to Earth, a whole mess of things could happen. Now, down on the ground, you'd be fine. Since space has no atmosphere, the explosion wouldn't produce the typical blast wave or mushroom-shaped cloud that we're used to seeing. You'd still see an explosion, but it wouldn't be nearly as violent, and the radiation would be too far away for it to harm Earth. But that doesn't mean nothing bad would happen. If the nukes were to detonate in our satellite orbit, we'd notice that right away. The explosions would create all kinds of space debris that would disrupt and destroy satellites. This would threaten our communications, information, and navigation systems around the world. Not to mention, the nukes could create an electromagnetic pulse over various countries, knocking out our power grids and cell phone towers. Despite this being an attempt at world peace, it could push the world into chaos.
Now, what if we tried detonating the nukes a little further from Earth? The safest bet would be to set the detonation zone at or beyond the Moon's orbit, about 384,000 kilometers away. As long as we don't hit our biggest satellite, this would be the best way to minimize the effects of this explosion back on Earth. Okay, finally, it's time for the new Big Bang. Staring out at the night sky, you'd first be treated to a sequence of brilliant flashes, almost like distant stars spontaneously combusting all at once. But you wouldn't see all 12,000 explosions at the same time. We'd time it to be a long series of blasts, spread out over weeks or months to ensure the safest, most controlled conditions. From Earth, the view would be mesmerizing. People all over the world would gather together to celebrate and watch the distant radioactive fireworks. And the flash of the explosions wouldn't be the only visual phenomenon you'd be treated to. All that energy released in these nuclear blasts would create new auroras to decorate our night sky all over the planet. These auroras would be useful to scientists who could analyze an abundance of data on the interaction between radiation and the Earth's magnetic field. If all goes well and the last explosion goes off without a hitch, it'd be time to celebrate a new era in modern human history. Ever since the first atomic bomb was created in 1945, we've lived on a planet loaded with weapons, capable of destroying all life on Earth. Not anymore. But that doesn't mean the consequences of this master plan wouldn't be potentially dangerous in the long run. All this new debris and radiation traveling further out into space could create disturbances well beyond our planet that we wouldn't even have conceived of. Maybe some future interplanetary astronauts will encounter dangerous clouds of radiation that will threaten their lives and the success of their mission. So, although disposing of our nuclear weapons in space could potentially benefit Earth, we'd have to be aware of the downsides that could unfold. Maybe it would be best if these nukes were detonated in a specific spot out in space, one far away from Earth.
Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, the world has been afraid of one thing: Russia's nukes. But what exactly would happen if Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to push the red button? What could lead to Putin detonating a nuclear weapon? What chain of command would this order need to follow? And what would happen if NATO's member countries fought back? This is What If, and here's what would happen if Russia launched a nuke. When the United States attacked the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, it marked the only 2 times in history that nuclear weapons have been used during a time of war. The destruction and casualties from these bombs were devastating. Combined, an estimated 120,000 people were killed instantly, and tens of thousands more in the following months. People within 1 kilometer of the detonations were carbonized by heat rays, and those within 1.5 kilometers from ground zero suffered flash burning and severe damage to their skin. Fast forward to today, and Russia has more nukes than any other country. And Putin has already ordered Russia's nuclear forces on high alert, threatening any country that sides with Ukraine. So, could the world be on a razor's edge of a nuclear winter? Based on Russia's policies on nuclear deterrence, there are a few basic principles by which Putin could make the decision to use nuclear weapons. One of the reasons for this world-changing launch could be ballistic missiles aimed at Russia or its allies. Another might be any attack on critical government or military sites that would undermine Russia's nuclear forces' ability to respond. Finally, and maybe the most concerning of reasons, is the use of conventional weapons against Russia that it perceives as a direct threat to its existence. Yeah, this means that Russia could launch nukes if any member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, started to directly intervene in the war in Ukraine. And it's this kind of nuclear posturing that has led to many Western leaders indicating that there's a limit to how far they would go to help Ukraine defend against Russia. Now, if this were to go down, it would all begin with Putin and a small briefcase that he keeps close to him at all times. This is known as the Chiget, and it would connect the Russian dictator to the command network of Russia's nuclear forces. Putin wouldn't be just pushing a big red button to launch. Instead, he would transmit launch orders to the General Staff, which is his central military command. The Russian General Staff would then launch nuclear missiles by sending authorization codes to individual weapons commanders. Or, in case the command posts were destroyed, they could bypass those by using a backup system called Perimeter. This would allow the General Staff to directly initiate the launch of land-based missiles remotely. If they were to do that, these land-based missiles would take about 30 minutes to reach a country like the United States. If the launch came from a submarine positioned closer to US territory, it would only take 10 to 15 minutes for the strike to land. Once launched, the US military's space-based infrared system would detect any missiles with infrared radiation. Within minutes, President Joe Biden would be alerted, and a few moments later, the response would likely be an immediate, massive counterattack. That would mean the deployment of potentially hundreds, if not thousands of aircraft, nuclear submarines, and land-based heavy artillery vehicles armed with missiles. But even this huge military action would still only be a reaction to the first launch. Imagine if a warhead detonated in Washington, D.C., just a few blocks away from the White House. Even if this device was only 2/3 as powerful as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, everything within approximately 1 kilometer would be destroyed. Over 45,000 people would be killed, and another 300,000 more injured. Anyone within 8 kilometers could be temporarily blinded by the overwhelming flash of light from the blast. People as far as 30 kilometers away from the explosion could be enveloped in a mixture of dust, debris, and deadly byproducts of radiation. This would be a terrible preview of the devastating effects that any further escalation could have on the whole world, not just North America. If Russia and the United States detonated their full arsenal of nuclear weapons, the entire planet would be covered with a blanket of soot in only 2 weeks. The soot would block sunlight and could lower the temperatures to below freezing even in the summer months. And it could take 10 years for it to dissipate. The threat of nuclear war is terrifying, but all may not be totally lost. Russia's army was considered to be one of the most powerful in the world, but their invasion of Ukraine has revealed that the Russian army may be more inadequately equipped and poorly trained than expected. The looming threat of nuclear war could just be another way for Russia to keep the world in a submissive state of fear. Putin may or may not have gone insane. He sure is unstable, but he's not the only person involved in launching nukes. Besides, nuclear war isn't a game. If you were the first person to launch a nuclear strike, you'd have very likely ensured your own death.
I don't imagine things would turn out well for Russia if they launched a nuke. But Putin has always been a bit of a wild card. Maybe with his army stretched thin, he loses this war and, as a last gasp, fires off his nuclear arsenal and then takes the Hitler way out and swallows some Novichok or polonium-210. Now, in the news recently was the first ever evacuation of the International Space Station. 4 astronauts were evacuated back to Earth for the first time for what's being called a serious medical issue. But don't worry, there's still astronauts up there running the ISS, and control has been handed off to a Russian cosmonaut. Not second-guessing his skills or allegiance at all, but it is keeping with our Russian theme, and does segue into our next hypothetical. What if Russia crashed the International Space Station?
Under the pressure of crushing economic sanctions, Russia is straining to play its own intimidation game. This time, they're threatening to take the International Space Station out of orbit and hurtle it down to Earth. How could they make good on this absurd threat? What places would be in danger of impact? And what would this all mean for the future of space exploration? This is What If, and here's what would happen if Russia crashed the International Space Station. The ISS orbits above the Earth's surface at an altitude of about 400 kilometers. From end to end, the largest spacecraft ever built is 109 meters. That means, including its solar panels, it stretches the length of an entire football field. And it has the volume of a 5-bedroom house to accommodate as many as 11 astronauts if needed. The station wouldn't exist if it weren't for the 15 nations that joined forces to build and use it. 5 different space agencies were involved in getting all the nodes and modules of the station off the ground and into orbit. But its days in orbit could be numbered. Dmitry Rogozin, Director General of Roscosmos, posted a series of tweets that stated, in part, "If you block cooperation with us, who will save the ISS from an uncontrolled deorbit that falls into the United States or Europe? There is also the option of dropping the 500-ton structure to India and China." Could Russia really hijack the ISS and turn it into a falling death trap? Bombastic as it sounds, the threat is not completely far-fetched. Russia could even manage to do it without the cooperation of the cosmonauts currently on board the station. Right now, significant changes to the orbital pattern of the ISS can't be done without the cooperation of Roscosmos. These adjustments can be made by the thrusters of 2 unmanned Russian Progress supply ships or a Zvezda service module. Without these necessary adjustments to orbit, the ISS would be left to fend for itself. This would put the station and the cosmonauts on board at risk of a dangerous collision with large amounts of debris currently orbiting the planet. On the other hand, the thrusters on these devices, primarily used for delivering supplies and fuel or making repairs, could be controlled to send the ISS out of orbit. But surely the Russians wouldn't endanger the lives of its own cosmonauts, right? Well, think again. In November of 2021, Russia tested an anti-satellite missile on one of its own satellites.
This threatened the safety of all ISS crew members who had to prepare for collisions with the massive amounts of debris generated by the explosion. So, with your doubts cast aside, now would be a good time to look up. Spot anything bright moving across the sky and getting bigger? You could easily think that this is just a comet streaking across the sky with its tail of colorful gas trailing behind it. You'd be stunned by the sheer beauty of this sight until you realize that it's the ISS heading right toward you. The ISS passes over India, China, the United States, and much of Europe. So it would be at a high risk of impact in many parts of the globe. However, Russia itself wouldn't have any reason to worry about self-inflicted damage in this case. The station is made from tough, durable materials like dense titanium, Kevlar, and high-grade steel. But entering the atmosphere, the intense heat and pressure could break it apart. And as that gets underway, you'd see fiery explosions of glitter and bright light. This would be both beautiful and a positive sign. The station breaking into smaller pieces could mean more impact sites, but the impacts would all be significantly less severe than if it remained intact. Imagine cities like Los Angeles, London, or Hong Kong taking a direct hit from a completely intact space station. It would leave a crater almost 1,300 meters wide and 470 meters deep. Anyone close to the impact area would be killed or severely burned in the ensuing explosive fireball. And the impact itself could trigger a magnitude 6 earthquake. Depending on where the strike occurred, you'd see tens of thousands of people or more die. Millions could be severely injured or displaced by the destruction. If all this unfolded, it would damage the relationships between many space agencies. And losing our only space laboratory currently in orbit would certainly be a significant setback to the future of space exploration. But if there's one silver lining, this kind of maneuver could take several years to unfold. Hopefully, this would give NASA and other agencies enough time to react. Maybe they'd be able to guide it directly into the spacecraft cemetery located in Point Nemo, the furthest region from land on Earth. This would be just a little earlier than expected, as the ISS is set to retire and plunge to this spot in 2031. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Wise words, but what if two of the world's most powerful nations burned their friendship and each other to the ground? What if China invaded Russia? What would turn China against its strongest ally? How would the world respond? And what would happen if this conflict went nuclear? This is What If, and here's what would happen if China invaded Russia. The current relationship between China and Russia is the strongest it's been since the 1950s. And these two nations share more than just a border. China buys most of its oil from its neighbor to the north. In early 2022, both countries announced collaborations on space, climate change, the internet, and artificial intelligence. After Russia invaded Ukraine and most of the world turned against Russia, China took a neutral stance. And when China set its sights on reclaiming Taiwan, Russia supported China's ambitions. It's safe to say these two allies have each other's backs. Well, for now. With Russia's resources drained due to its war in Ukraine, China might have an opportunity to make a massive land grab. So, if this friendship between two dictators turns deadly, how would the United States react? If China broke off its loyalty to Russia, the Chinese would have the edge in the numbers department. China invests $252 billion in its military every year. That's 4 times what Russia spends. And with most of Russia's forces amassed along European borders, China could move its massive ground forces in from the east in a quest to control its former allies' resources and oil reserves, and to reclaim lands Russia annexed in 1860. With over 2 million troops, China could dominate in a ground war. China also has 35 million soldiers in reserve that it could call into action at any time. That show of force might seem overwhelming, but it wouldn't compare to the Russian military's experience, right? Well, maybe not. During the illegal invasion of Ukraine, many Russian soldiers abandoned their vehicles after running out of gas. Yeah, one of the world's largest oil suppliers failed to supply its army with enough gas. The Russian army has been slow to adopt new technology since the Cold War, and fighting 2 wars at once could weaken the Russian soldiers' already low morale. But China may not fare much better. Despite having the largest modernized army on Earth, it hasn't fought a war since 1979. As China moved in, it would find Russia's terrain hard to conquer. Advancing troops across this massive country could be brutal for both sides. Russia's oil reserves could help it turn the tide, as could its fleet of armored vehicles. Russia has a tank force of 12,000 units, while China has less than 6,000. However, with the Baikal Mountains acting as a natural barrier, eastern Russian cities like Vladivostok could fall first to the invading army. Going deeper into central Russia, where the oil fields lie, could be catastrophic. China could lose significant numbers of people and equipment. While their naval forces are equal, Russia's ships would be too spread out across the seas to repel China's attack. By attacking en masse, China's vast submarine fleet could decimate Russia's Pacific fleet. And would anyone come to Russia's defense? These 2 warring nations are the biggest trade and political rivals of the United States. If China and Russia were at war, the US might just sit this one out and let its competitors eat each other alive.
Let them fight.
Since the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed to respond to the now defunct USSR, none of its 30 countries would dare to get involved on anyone's behalf. Russia might seek help from former Soviet states and trade partners like Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Cuba. But China? Well, that's a different story. North Korea might be the only friend they have in this fight. This conflict would be drawn out, bloody, and have no end in sight. With such a desperate fight on its hands, Russia would have only one card left to play. Russia has over 6,000 nuclear weapons in its arsenal, ready to strike. With only 350 known warheads, China would be outgunned. But it would only take a few strategic hits from both sides to create a nuclear wasteland in all of Eurasia. This promise of mutually assured self-destruction might be the only thing that could prevent this apocalypse. As Russia continues its reign of terror in Ukraine, many countries are already seeking different oil suppliers so they can cut off support to this regime. A China-Russia war would devastate Russia's remaining trading partners and China. If China turned on its ally, no country could ever trust them again. I think if that hypothetical were to ever happen, with Russia's army in shambles, now would be the perfect time. And I imagine that next up,
would be Mongolia and Kazakhstan, who geographically sit right in the middle, blocking China from having a contiguous new giant communist country. Yeah. Okay, coming up, a look at what if the leader of the free world, was assassinated. Well, depending on what you believe, Donald Trump has survived multiple assassination attempts, and Wikipedia lists another 15 plots to murder him. Now, obviously no one is advocating for this, and we took some heat for our video that was just describing the process of what would happen in the aftermath. It's a process that the US government has already thought about and has already figured out a contingency plan for it. And it would have consequences for the rest of the world. But first, we take a look at the prospect of a nuclear war fought in space. Yeah, it's better than using nukes down here on Earth, but it still has a big impact on us.
Our planet is on the brink of another devastating world war. And while it's terrifying to imagine the realities this conflict could bring to people all over the world, this time it could play out on a battlefield unlike any other. Space. Which nations would be the main cosmic combatants? What kinds of never-before-seen weaponry would be used? And would it ever end? This is What If, and here's what would happen if World War III was fought in space. Before we launch into the cosmic battleground of World War III, let's take a look at the terrestrial tensions leading us to the brink of war. No matter when exactly the full-scale conflict would erupt, the stage has been set already for quite some time. Many of the geopolitical rivalries and alliances have already been compounding and could ignite beyond our atmosphere at any moment. A digital arms race for technological supremacy has been brewing between the US, China, and Russia. But this cyber warfare isn't the only realm where the most powerful nations on Earth have already been disputing. International agreements such as the Nuclear Forces Treaties are eroding. Climate change is turning the Arctic into a strategic military position, and nations are already developing all kinds of anti-satellite and other space-capable technologies. With the boundaries between Earth and space getting blurrier, this powder keg of international relations is about to blow right out of the atmosphere. If a violent international conflict erupted in the final frontier, would we even be able to call it a world war? Well, debating this name wouldn't be very helpful when the fight would be unfolding on entirely new dimensions. Okay, not literally in new dimensions, yet. The war would still be limited by our four-dimensional framework of space and time. That's not to say that even further in the future we could be fighting interdimensional wars. Let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves. The technologies of space warfare would be a leap beyond our current capabilities. The three most powerful nations, and others with advanced space programs like India, Japan, and the European Union, would need to accelerate the development of an entirely new arsenal of weapons. Satellites, old and new, would become active components of the various war machines. They could be reconfigured into highly sophisticated communications scramblers, anti-missile defense systems, or even high-energy laser beams. This could sound like science fiction, and it is, but it's only the beginning. Each of the warring nations would soon develop spacecraft to fight on battlegrounds beyond traditional orbits. These spacecraft could be both human-controlled and autonomous. But they'd likely resemble advanced fighter jets designed for intricate maneuvering in the vacuum of space. And they'd carry highly destructive weaponry to engage in short-range dogfights with enemy spaceships, as well as long-range laser weapons to attack targets back on Earth. Among some of the most terrifying new weapons that could wreak havoc and destruction on terrestrial targets would be the so-called rods from God.
Now, all that stuff might sound like pure sci-fi, but I regret to inform you that these could be an actual real-life possibility. The rods from God would be dense, heavy rods made of tungsten that could be dropped from satellites down onto Earth. They would measure over 6 meters in length and weigh nearly 4.5 tons. Yeah, known as a kinetic bombardment rod, these weapons would accelerate to incredible speeds as they descend through the atmosphere. Upon impact, they'd carry the force of a nuclear weapon, but without any of the radioactive fallout. Entire cities could be wiped out with the press of a button. So, although this war is primarily fought in space, Earth could still suffer some serious consequences. But more on that in a bit. The concept for this radical weapon has been around since the aftermath of the Second World War. It was developed by a researcher for Boeing as a way to deliver devastating blows without the need for deploying nuclear weapons. In the battleground of space, weapons like these would be a game changer. And the satellites carrying these rods would be highly strategic targets to take out to avoid massive casualties from artificial meteor strikes. One of the most essential strategic sites in a war in space would be the biggest of all satellites in orbit, the Moon. This celestial body would be a highly disputed territory for establishing bases. It would also be home to artillery and research and development laboratories to forge new weapons. It could even be a battlefield of its own as different countries attack each other's bases or lead ground invasions through the rocky landscapes. The meaning of one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind would take on entirely new interpretations in this dangerous war zone. With all the conflict erupting in space, the borders of the battle could continually expand as newer and more capable technologies develop. Eventually, the struggle could lead to a deadly conflict over Mars, the asteroid belt, or beyond. The repercussions for this war on earthly civilians would also be severe. The wide destruction of satellites would lead to a global breakdown of communications, navigation systems, and weather prediction technology. Economies would be devastated as all kinds of trade agreements would fall apart. And the budgets of all the world's most powerful nations would go almost exclusively to further advancements in the space military-industrial complexes. And while the battles would rage off the surface of the planet, there'd be no escape from the new reality of war. Every night, as you watch the stars, you'd catch glimpses of orbital bombardments easily visible to the naked eye. Now, you could be wondering, just how far would World War III in space go? And just how would it ever end? Well, at this moment, that's impossible to say, but you could certainly imagine that this kind of war would be almost entirely unpredictable. It would no longer be about taking over pieces of land on Earth. It would be about who could conquer the vastness of space. What would begin with satellite crossfire could evolve to the construction of massive space stations that serve as bases for a new era of deep space exploration and conflict. And to take things even further, who's to say it would ever end at all? Or maybe it wouldn't be humans, but another advanced alien civilization that would swoop in and diplomatically end the conflict. On July 13th, 2024, Donald Trump escaped an attempt on his life. He managed to turn his head at just the right angle so that a bullet shot in his direction grazed his ear rather than hitting him in the head. But what would happen if he didn't turn his head? What if Donald Trump was assassinated that day? Who would replace him? And could this lead to an American Civil War? In this video, we're going to go through multiple scenarios on what would happen if Donald Trump got assassinated. The first one we'll look at is if he actually got shot on July 13th. Now, I need to be clear that at the time of this recording, the assassination attempt is still being investigated, so some details may change, but what we do know is that the shooter came incredibly close. Another thing that I want to make clear is that I don't wish ill will toward anyone. If you're new to the channel, you should know that we often look at news stories and give our hypothetical take on it. That's all that this is. In Butler, Pennsylvania, on July 13th, the assassin shot from 140 meters away. Trump had just turned his head a couple of centimeters. If he hadn't have done this, it's very likely that he would have been killed by the bullet. Instead, the shot grazed his ear. If he hadn't been so lucky, we'd be looking at a completely different world today. Donald Trump would be dead. So, what would happen next? One of the most important things that would need to be figured out would be who would take the mantle of the Republican presidential nominee. It all depends on when this happens. The answer can change, if it were before the Republican National Convention or after. So, in the case of the July 13th assassination attempt, things would get a little more complicated. Since this event happened right before the Republican National Convention, which was set for July 15th, the delegates involved in selecting the Republican presidential nominee would have to move incredibly fast. With little time in between the shooting and the convention, the nominee would likely be decided on the convention floor that night. It would be incredibly messy and frantic. There'd be backroom deals and public speeches from the hopeful nominees. Now, since Trump had no strong opposition during the primaries, almost everyone could be considered. It would be like going back to square one. Even people who didn't run in the primaries could be nominated. This would be a night full of bids for power, and whoever's left standing would be the Republican nominee, who would then run for president. Now, there are some other scenarios that we'll get into in a bit, but what might happen outside of politics? Well, the answer to that is a lot more unknown and potentially terrifying. Donald Trump was seen yelling "fight" after he got shot, and there's a good chance his supporters would do just that. Now, we're not saying everyone, but the extreme fringe of his base might possibly engage. Just look what happened on January 6th, 2021. Trump supporters stormed the United States Capitol building. This was after their emotions were stoked by talk about a stolen election, a claim that was proven to be false. So, what would happen if their leader was assassinated? Well, they'd likely be looking for someone to blame, potentially a group of people or the opposing party. Donald Trump has incredibly passionate supporters, more passionate than what we've seen from almost any other political figure in the past. There's a good chance there could be outbursts of violence and civil unrest. Hopefully, this violence would be contained to small pockets of the country and not become a full-on civil war. With Biden still being president and commander-in-chief, he's in control of the military. If things got out of hand, hopefully they'd be able to put a stop to it. And hopefully no bigger militias would form either. Now, even without any violence, Trump would be idolized even more than he is today. Supporters would make him a martyr. And if some people on the left were happy that this happened, this would create an even bigger political divide across the country. The new Republican nominee would certainly use this as fuel to energize voters, turning him or her into an even stronger candidate. And more Trump supporters might be inspired to vote in the election now, even without him in the race. But what if Trump wasn't dead, but incapacitated? Well, technically the rules and laws that are in place would still apply, but there could be more nuance. If there's a chance Trump comes back and he's healthy, then the party would likely debate whether or not he could continue as the nominee. They'd also consider if he'd be in good enough shape to be sworn in if he potentially became president. Now, the story is a little bit different if the assassination attempt happened after the RNC on July 15th. Donald Trump would be elected as their nominee, so what would happen if he were to die before the election? Well, you might think that his running mate would be automatically elevated, so his current choice for vice president, J.D. Vance, would become the presidential nominee, but That's not the case. The nominee for president would still be voted upon by the Republican Party. They might go back to square one and reconvene the National Convention, or they might just select a new candidate. There's a good chance that Trump's running mate would become the presidential nominee, but it's not a guarantee. Other party members might want to get into the mix. Now, the same rules would apply if Trump won the election on November 5th. That would make him the president-elect until Inauguration Day on January 20th. If he were to die between those dates, the vice president-elect doesn't automatically become president. Since Trump wouldn't officially be sworn in, the 25th Amendment, which allows the vice president to become president if the current one dies, wouldn't be applicable. Now, this got me thinking, could anything like this potentially delay the election? Well, technically it could, but it's incredibly unlikely. Election day is set by federal law, and it's November 5th. In order for this to change, it would need to be voted on in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. The president would need to sign off as well, but this can only happen if both parties are in agreement, which seems unlikely, especially given the political divide gripping the United States. Also, this would only delay the election by a couple of weeks. As the Constitution states, a president needs to be sworn in by January 20th of the following year. Failing that, there would be no president and things could get really ugly. Now, this is how the election would be handled, which boils down to a lot of bureaucracy and systems we already have in place. What happens next could be extreme civil unrest, violence, anger, a potential civil war. It's safe to say this would be a scary time for America, for a number of reasons. On the other hand, maybe a violent act like this might inspire Americans to put down their weapons and come together. But considering the political division, that seems unlikely. Now, this is not a fun hypothetical scenario. Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, it would be a scary time for Americans and for people around the world. Let's just hope this assassination attempt doesn't lead to any further violent acts. I know I don't want to end up in a World War III. Well, that about wraps it up for us here at What If Headquarters. Sorry if we rattled you with these tumultuous tales of turmoil, turbulent times, and terrible tyranny. I think if we've learned anything here today, it's to start digging your bunker, to stock up on rice and canned foods, and make friends with your most resourceful neighbors. I'm counting on my friends Tom and AJ to help me through the apocalypse. I'm hoping it never comes to that, but like the scouts always say, be prepared. And if you're getting anxious about the state of the world today, well, try to focus on things you can control and things you can change. Maybe get involved and be part of the solution. Put your emotions in motion. And hopefully, I'll see you next time for another What If? Hey, welcome everyone to another one of our special in-depth What If shows. Today, we're diving into the fascinating realm of global affairs. Whoa. Stay with us. It's going to be exciting. This is What If, after all. I'm not here to teach a world affairs class. Let's have some fun. And we will. You know, our little blue marble is currently experiencing what is called a robust geopolitical shuffle, which is just a fancy way of saying everyone is politely but firmly disagreeing on absolutely everything. From trade to oil to invasion to the proper amount of mustard on a salami sandwich. And there's no limit, no. And speaking of disagreements, there seems to be a new global pastime these days.